What if the most forbidden chapter of Genesis was never removed, just hidden? For thousands of years, the world has accepted that Eve's story ends the moment she walks out of Eden. The gates slam shut, the angels take their post, and just like that, history moves on without her. But deep inside the ancient pages of the Ethiopian Bible, one of the oldest and most complete biblical canons ever preserved, there are writings that claim to reveal something astonishing. They describe Eve's final days, and the secrets she carried with her all the way to her grave. What did she remember about the garden? What did Eden actually look like from the inside? Did she speak of the serpent one last time? Some of these manuscripts suggest her final words were not simply reflections of a woman drowning in regret. They were warnings about humanity's future, and hints about truths the rest of the world was never meant to rediscover. If these accounts are real, then everything we think we know about the beginning of our story has been misunderstood for generations. So, before we reveal what Eve said in her final moments, hit like and subscribe, because they don't want you to know this. What she remembered about Eden. Picture this. A woman is dying. She has less than 2 days left to live, and instead of resting, instead of letting go quietly, she is sitting at the entrance of a dark cave, speaking, telling her son everything. Not just memories, not just regrets. She is giving him a detailed first-hand account of what the Garden of Eden actually looked like from the inside. Details that directly contradict everything the Western world was raised to believe. This account comes from a scroll that has been locked away in the remote highlands of Ethiopia for over 1,000 years, a text known as the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan. And for centuries, the monks who guarded it refused to let the outside world anywhere near it. Only now, through painstaking translation work, has the full story begun to reach us. So what did she remember? The first thing she told her son Seth was about the light. Not sunlight, something completely different. She said the light inside the garden did not come from a single source. Not the sun, not the moon, not any fire. It came from everywhere at once. The air itself glowed. The ground reflected it back. Even the leaves seemed to hold it inside them, like each one was quietly lit from within. Dr. August Dillman, the German linguist at the University of Gießen who first translated this text from its original Ge'ez language back in 1853, noted in his commentary that this description of Eden's light has no parallel in any other ancient text he had encountered. He called it one of the most striking passages in all of Ethiopic literature. And that was just the opening line of what she revealed. She went on to describe the gold lining the riverbed of the Pishon, one of the 4 rivers of paradise mentioned in Genesis. But this was not gold like a coin or a bracelet. She said it pulsed beneath the surface of the water, like a living vein running through the body of the earth itself. The current ran deep and fast, yet you could see every grain of gold shimmering at the bottom, clear as glass. She talked about the animals, how they moved without a trace of fear, how they came to her and Adam willingly, without being called. And she spoke about the serpent before its fall, describing it as the most beautiful creature in the entire garden. And then she reached the part about the tree of life. And this is where things get really unexpected. The tree that changed everything. We have all heard of the tree of life. Most people picture something majestic, enormous branches, golden fruit, maybe a soft glow around it. But Eve did not describe it that way at all. She said the fragrance of the tree of life was like the very breath of the Creator. And she did not mean you could smell it with your nose the way you smell a flower or fresh bread. She said it was a presence that entered your lungs and completely transformed the way your body felt from the inside out. It filled you with a calm so total, so absolute, that the concept of fear simply ceased to exist while you were near it. Your body did not just relax, it became incapable of fear. And here is the part that stopped her son cold. She said she could still smell it. After hundreds of years in exile, after centuries of sleeping on stone floors, eating whatever the cursed ground would reluctantly give them, watching children grow old and die, that scent was still alive in her memory, sharp and real as the day she was driven out. She looked at Seth and told him not to mistake the world he had grown up in for the world that was intended. The thorns were not the design. The suffering was not the plan. It was the consequence. The original earth was something his entire generation had never seen and could not imagine, and she was the only living person who remembered it. That is what terrified her, not death. She had made peace with death. What terrified her was that if she died without passing on this memory, her grandchildren would eventually grow comfortable in a broken world. They would accept exile as home. They would mistake the thorns for the garden. And that was something she absolutely could not allow. This is the moment the Ethiopian tradition sees her differently from the rest of the world. While others reduced her to a cautionary tale, a symbol of weakness and blame, the Ethiopian monks understood something deeper. She was the memory keeper of the entire human race. While Adam had focused on survival, on law, on the labor of daily life, she was the one who kept the blueprint of paradise alive inside herself. She carried it like a flame through centuries of darkness. They do not call her the woman who made the mistake. They call her the first teacher of the secret things. But what happened during her final 6 days? Because the structure of how she died, the precise timeline, holds a secret that almost everyone misses entirely. The widow of the world here is something the original script barely pauses on, but you need to sit with this for a moment. According to these scrolls, Adam died on a Friday, the same day of the week he was originally created. That is not a coincidence the ancient writers slipped in carelessly. That symmetry was intentional. Creation began on a Friday, and for Adam, it ended on one too. But she did not die with him. She outlived him by exactly 6 days. And those 6 days were not random either. 6 days, a mirror of the 6 days of creation. As if her passing out of this world was structured like a cosmic echo of the world being built in the first place. For nearly an entire week, she was the only living person on earth who still remembered what it felt like to walk through Eden. She was the last witness. Every man, woman, and child alive at that moment owed their existence to her. And not a single one of them could share the weight of what she was carrying. The scrolls say she sat at the entrance to the Cave of Treasures, the dark hollow in the mountainside where Adam had just been buried, and she refused to eat or drink anything. Her body was shutting down, but her mind, the texts say, was sharper than it had been in decades. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, searching for some trace of a light that had been taken from her nearly 1,000 years before. Solomon Caesar Milan, the Oxford-trained linguist who produced the first English translation of this text in 1882, wrote in his personal notes that this passage struck him as one of the most emotionally devastating sequences in all of ancient literature. He said the image haunted him long after he put the manuscript down. The first woman, alone at the mouth of a cave, starving by choice, the only human alive who still remembered paradise. But she was not simply mourning. According to the text, she was functioning as a living bridge between two worlds. The physical world of her children behind her, and the unseen world ahead, where Adam had just gone. She could perceive both sides, and that gap between what she was experiencing and what her family could see was about to produce a revelation no one expected. The chariot in the sky. On the 4th day after Adam's burial, she stopped speaking mid-sentence. Her eyes were open. She was breathing, but she was not there. Seth called her name. Her other children shook her gently. Nothing. She had entered a state the scrolls describe as beyond sleep and beyond waking, somewhere the ancient writers clearly struggled to find words for. And then the sky above the cave tore open, not parted, not gradually brightened. The text uses the word tearing, violent, sudden, like fabric being ripped apart by something with no patience for a gentle entrance. And she did not see darkness beyond it. She did not see an empty void waiting to swallow her. She saw a massive chariot of blinding light descending from the heavens, pulled by 4 enormous eagles whose wings were so wide and so luminous that they blocked the sky for miles in every direction. The light coming off those wings was not fire. It was not sunlight. It was the same light she had just spent her final days describing to Seth, that warm, living glow that breathed and pulsed with intention. The light of Eden, right there above the cave. And riding on that chariot, surrounded by ranks of celestial beings arranged in precise formation, she saw the soul of Adam. He was being escorted upward by the archangels Michael and Gabriel. She was watching the very first human soul in history being carried into the afterlife. No living person had ever witnessed anything like this before. She was the only one. But what she saw next was the moment that broke centuries of guilt in a single instant. She saw a place the text calls the Lake of Akaruzian. In her vision, the angels brought Adam's soul to this crystal lake and washed him. And as they did, the garments of light that had been stripped from him the moment they were expelled from Eden began to return. His brightness came back. His original glory was fully restored. He was clean. Sir E. A. Wallace Budge, the keeper of Egyptian and Assyrian antiquities at the British Museum, who spent decades translating Syriac and Ethiopic manuscripts, noted that this motif of heavenly washing and the restoration of luminous garments appears across multiple ancient Near Eastern traditions, but nowhere with the emotional intensity found in the Ethiopian version. He described it as carrying a weight of redemption that transcended its textual origins. That vision dismantled something she had been carrying for close to 1,000 years. The shame, the guilt, the belief that she had permanently and irreversibly broken something that could never be repaired. She watched Adam being forgiven, and she understood. Death was not the punishment. It was the return. The exile was not permanent. It was a chapter, not the ending. That understanding transformed her completely. She was no longer a condemned woman counting down her final hours. She was a queen preparing to go home, and once she understood that, she had one final thing left to do. The final prophecy. On the dawn of the 5th day, a heavy stillness settled over the land. The kind of silence that does not feel empty. It feels like something enormous is about to happen, and even the air knows it. She knew her time was no longer measured in days. It was hours now. And in those final hours, she did something that would quietly establish a template for every great assembly, every council of elders, every royal summons in human civilization for thousands of years to come. She called for a gathering, every living descendant, every branch of the family she had built over nearly 1,000 years of life. They came from mountain peaks and valley floors, walking for miles through rough and unforgiving terrain just to reach her. Thousands of people, the entire human family at that point in history, standing before her in a silence so heavy it seemed to compress the air. And when she rose to speak, she did not look like a dying woman. She looked like a monument. She gave them no gold. She had no land to deed, no throne to pass down. The earth was still wild and unclaimed. What she gave them instead were words, a prophecy that would echo through the dark corridors of history for thousands of years. She told them a day was coming when the entire surface of the earth would be washed clean by water, a great flood. The corruption that had already begun spreading through the early generations would be swept away. They had no frame of reference for this. Floods, they knew. But a flood that covered everything? She did not stop there. She told them another reckoning would follow. Much further in the future than any of them could imagine. Not water this time. Fire. The world would be tested by flame. To a people who had only recently learned to control fire as a tool for warmth and cooking, this was a terrifying image. She was telling them that the same element they used to survive the cold would one day consume the world. But she paired these warnings with a promise that anchored their hearts, where the fear might have otherwise shattered them. She swore that the human seed she carried, her bloodline, would survive both the drowning and the burning. No flood would erase it. No fire would consume it. Her children would endure through every catastrophe the world could devise. And then she spoke of someone specific, a descendant, born from her own flesh, who would accomplish what no other human being in all of history ever could. He would walk back through the locked gates of the garden, and he would not go alone. He would bring every last soul of humanity with him. Think about the weight of that moment. This was the first recorded promise of a Savior ever delivered to a suffering world, and it did not come from a king on a throne or a priest in a temple. It came from a dying woman sitting at the edge of a cave, offering a lifeline of hope to a weeping family that had nothing left but her voice. She was not guessing. She was not speculating. She was reporting what she had been shown: the marriage of the grave. As the 5th day gave way to the 6th, the world itself seemed to register that something was ending. When she finally stopped breathing, the ground beneath her did not simply go quiet. The scrolls say it began to vibrate. Not a violent earthquake, but a deep, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat, as if the earth was recognizing the return of something that had originally come from it. Flesh and bone, fashioned from dust at the very beginning of the story, coming home at last. They carried her into the Cave of Treasures, that sacred vault carved into the mountainside where the relics of the first family had been stored for generations. The gold, the incense, the myrrh that had been given to Adam as tokens of a future promise, all of it waiting, untouched, in the dark. And when they placed her body to rest, they did not put her in a separate corner. They laid her directly to the right side of Adam, who had gone into the earth 6 days before her. The ancient writings call this the marriage of the grave, 2 people fashioned from a single body at the dawn of creation, split apart, driven out of paradise together, surviving nearly 1,000 years of exile together, and now brought back together one final time, side by side in the silent embrace of the earth, exactly as they had been before the world began. But the story does not end there, because the moment they laid her down beside him, something happened that no one present could explain. The gold and the spices that had been sitting dormant in that cave for generations, untouched, unlit, unburned, suddenly began releasing a fragrance so powerful and so impossibly sweet that it could be detected for miles outside the mountain. People standing far from the entrance described smelling something they had no words for, a scent that did not belong to any plant or flower they had ever encountered in the world outside. It was as if the aroma of the lost garden had been sealed inside those offerings all along, locked, dormant, waiting for this exact moment. And when the 2 halves of humanity were reunited in the earth, it was finally released, a tangible physical sign that the promise made at the beginning was still active, still breathing, even in the silence of a tomb. Why you were never told this story. So why does almost nobody alive today know any of this? The answer is simple, and it is uncomfortable. The people who compiled the texts that became the widely accepted biblical canon had an agenda, whether conscious or not. They were uncomfortable with the image of the first woman as a powerful prophet, a visionary leader, the keeper of humanity's most sacred memory. That image did not fit the narrative they were building. They wanted a cautionary tale, a symbol of weakness, the origin point of human failure, and nothing more. So they stripped away her death, her visions, her prophecies, her final words of hope, and they reshaped her into a character who existed in the story only to make a mistake. But the monks in the high mountain monasteries of Ethiopia refused to cooperate with that erasure. They understood that the history of the human race is incomplete, fundamentally, irreparably incomplete, without the testimony of the mother. They guarded these scrolls with their lives because they believed the hope of the world was first spoken through her lips. For 6 days, she was the widow of the entire world, a solitary figure of mourning who demonstrated for every future generation what it looks like to endure the longest and most brutal stretches of history without losing hope. She died with her eyes fixed on the sky, still dreaming of the garden she once walked through, and the descendant who would one day lead her children back through its gates. She did not die as a failure. She died as the first prophet, the first teacher, the keeper of a memory so powerful that an entire religious establishment spent centuries trying to bury it. And if a story this foundational could be hidden for over 1,000 years, what else is still sealed in those mountain caves? What other truths are locked inside clay jars or hidden behind the stone walls of forgotten chapels scattered across the Ethiopian highlands? The full story of the beginning has not been told yet, and the Ethiopian Bible may be the only key left capable of unlocking all of it. Now, here is a question I want you to sit with before you go. If you could live for 900 years, but it meant watching the world change the way she did, carrying the memory of paradise in a world that had completely forgotten it, would you want that life? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know what you think. And if this story shook something loose in you the way it did for me, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we are going deeper into the forbidden books of Ethiopia next. And what those scrolls reveal about what happened after the flood is going to change everything you thought you knew. See you there.